Happy Earth Day, everyone! My name is Jahmila Best, and I'm the program's intern at Girl Up, and I'm very excited to be moderating our Girl Talk on driving environmental justice forward. Girl Up gives youth the resources and platform to start a movement wherever they are. Our members are creating the change they want to see in the world, starting in their local communities. Young leaders have influenced policy around the world, petitioning decision makers, working with national and local organizations, even hosting their own advocacy boot camps. Our youths have demanded bolder action to tackle the climate crisis and the full implementation of the Paris Agreement with a view of ensuring its long-term goals are met. Whether through education, technology, science, or law, young people far and wide are tapping into their skills to speak up for climate action. However, many young people might be overwhelmed with climate change because they're not sure what to do about it. This could be due to a lack of knowledge, or they feel unsure about how to affect systemic change, or they're just unable to express their views in a way that feels impactful. It's important for young leaders to recognize that they don't need to know everything about environmental and climate science to talk about climate change. We at Girl Up hope conversations like the one we are having today helps to show youths the power of their voice. Please remember to place any comments that you have in the chat box throughout the presentation. Mainstreaming climate into daily conversations about your food, your health, the weather, your house, your travel plans, etc., and just different issues you care about is critical to building the collective will to address climate change. With that being said, I would now like to introduce Dr. Erica Dodds, who is a co-anxiety and environmental expert and a climate change advocate. She's the COO of the Foundation for Climate Restoration, the nonprofit committing to removing the excess carbon from our atmosphere. Dr. Dodds is committed to restoring our climate to safe levels of CO2 to safeguard our planet for future generations. She believes that is the key to setting a goal of restoring a proven safe climate. I am now super excited to pass it to her.
Thank you so much, Jahmila, for that introduction. I'm really honored to be here with all of you, and happy Earth Day to everyone. The Foundation for Climate Restoration, as Jahmila said, is committed to restoring a safe and healthy climate, and that is surprisingly not a given when it comes to our climate goals. As Jahmila said, organizations like Girl Up and other climate advocacy organizations have done a phenomenal job of raising the bar on climate ambition. And this has been desperately needed. We've known about climate change for over a century now. I think that some of the earliest references to the warming effect of burning fossil fuels are from the 1890s. But it wasn't until around the 1970s that there started being high-profile, widespread calls for curbing fossil fuel use, curbing CO2 emissions. And even though those calls started then, not much happened. In 1988, we passed the 350 parts per million threshold of CO2 in the atmosphere, and that's what scientists widely view to be the survivable level of CO2. So ever since then, the level has been rising and rising, and now we're above 415 parts per million. This is pretty alarming, not just because that level is so high, but because we're continuing our emissions and because the CO2 in the atmosphere stays there for centuries if we don't do something about it. The Paris goals were, a landmark step in setting a target of what we think will work for our global community in terms of our climate. And this was a critical first step, but Paris goals aim for net zero by 2050. And while this is a huge improvement compared to what we're headed towards right now, it's important to realize that net zero doesn't begin to address the legacy CO2 in the atmosphere. So at the Foundation for Climate Restoration, we came out of the question, what is the climate that we want for our future? And the answer, which seems obvious in retrospect, is a climate that we know all of us can survive. And the critical part here is everyone, right? Net zero by 2050 will have drastic impact on our climate. And we know that the people who are most vulnerable to all kinds of, economic and social consequences are the ones who suffer most from climate impacts. And among those, of course, the most impacted are girls and women. Girls and women are the ones who suffer the most when there are food shortages, who have to travel the farthest when water sources become scarce, who bear the burdens of caring when climate impacts impact the health of their families and communities. So targeting a climate that is safe and healthy for all of us is really critical. And what that means is we need to address not only our current emissions, but also the 95% of carbon dioxide that's causing the warming in our climate that's already in the atmosphere. And that's a huge job. So when we started working on this problem, we thought, well, if only there were solutions that could get all of this excess carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, then the problem would be solved. We just need the technology to do it. But once we started looking, we found that there were solutions out there that were very promising, but seemed like they could be scaled up to the needed scale, that seemed like they could be financeable pretty easily, and that would keep that CO2 permanently out of circulation. But even though those solutions were emerging or already existed, they weren't being scaled or implemented at anywhere near the needed rate. So we realized that it wasn't enough to just have the solutions. We really need the public and political will. And that's where organizations like Girl Up and all of the many youth climate advocacy organizations come into play. There's so much education needed around climate, and that's why one of the themes of Earth Day this year is climate literacy. And at the foundation, we've actually just developed a new climate curriculum for young people ages 8 through 12. So if you happen to have any younger siblings or kids who would be interested in learning about climate change and climate restoration, the idea of this curriculum is that it gives young people the basics of climate change in a way that leaves them empowered and inspired to do something instead of resigned and hopeless. So with that, I am so inspired by the young people in Girl Up and on the panel later on. It's wonderful to see that there are so many young people now who are becoming experts in climate change, who are raising the bar and asking for a climate that everyone can survive. And with that, I'll hand it back to Jahmila. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Dodds, for your opening remarks. I'm now excited to hop into our panel. So we have a phenomenal lineup of speakers today, including Elizabeth Wathuti, who is an environmentalist, climate activist, and the founder of the Green Generation Initiative. We also have Girl Up leader Ilinca from the US, Girl Up leader Marina from Brazil, and Girl Up leader Ray from Rwanda. And just a reminder during this section, please put any of the questions you have in the Q&A chat. So I'm now going to pass it to our speakers to introduce themselves. Ilinca, will you please kick us off with an introduction?
Sounds great. Thank you so much. My name is Ilinca Drondo, and I am a high school junior. I live in New Hampshire, and I currently serve as the co-president of the Girl Up Greater Boston Coalition. I am so excited to be here today and have the chance to unite my passions for environmental justice with gender equality. I worked to organize the climate strikes in New Hampshire in 2019, and also to testify for and write environmental legislation. And I'm really grateful to be here today and to hear from all of the amazing speakers.
Alrighty, Marina, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Marina. I'm from Brazil. I'm a senior in high school, and I've been organizing with Fridays for the Future for 2 years right now. And here in Brazil, I advocate for a climate education that is able for everyone and not only the privileged. And I'm really happy to be here and address these issues that are so urgency and needs to be addressed.
Alrighty, and Ray, could you introduce yourself, please? It seems like Ray might be having some internet difficulties right now. So we are going to go to Elizabeth, our panel moderator, to introduce herself. And then Elizabeth, could you also kick off the panel discussion after that?
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Wathuti. I'm an environmentalist and a climate activist from Kenya. And I'm also the founder of Green Generation Initiative that nurtures young people to love nature and to be environmentally conscious at a young age. I have personally been inspired by nature and my surrounding, having grown up in the most forested region in Kenya. And that is how I got to connect with nature. And in the process, I also began to feel the pain of nature caused by environmental degradation, which explains why I am currently on a mission to also fight for nature's regeneration and ensure that the world's natural resources remains intact. And personally, it's a story also about how I have felt heartbroken witnessing deforestation at first hand, and also the fact that the climate crisis is no longer a future concern. And despite the fact that it's not happening where you are, it does not mean that it's not happening at all. There are people that have to face and deal with the worst impacts of this crisis every day. And the challenge also is the challenge of inequalities, that the people that have contributed the least to this crisis are the ones that have to bear the brunt of the impact, and they're the ones that have to deal with the most impacts, and yet they don't have a huge capacity to adapt or even the resources required to adapt to the impacts of this crisis. And so it's really great to be having this conversation today, because it's a time where the world is also stepping up to see how these challenges can be addressed. And we are seeing so many young people around the world are taking up the challenge, and they've stepped up to call upon the world leaders to take action. And at the same time, they have also stepped up to be the change that they want to see in the world. I have personally always envisioned a world where we will all live in harmony with nature, and a world where we will put people and our planet above profits, and a world where everyone will be mindful about how we leave this planet for the next generations. And clearly, these are the solutions that we will need to focus on right now if we are to begin addressing the impacts of the climate crisis. And so it's a really great honor to be moderating this panel session today. And I'm happy to be hearing also from our panelists today, who will share with us their actions on climate change and also some of their views around climate change. And also, just to shine light, it is important to also take note of the millions of young people around the world, even in the global south, that are working every day on solutions that are going to help their communities adapt and mitigate the impacts of climate change. And it is all about realizing that the problem is huge for so many people around the world. And of course, the fact that we also have to deal with the COVID-19 crisis now doubles the whole challenge. And it's about also looking into nature for solutions and making sure that we do not repeat the mistakes that were done by previous generations, and of course, continue to hold every person accountable. And so allow me to step into the panel discussion session, and I will ask the panelists to really respond to the first question. And we're going to begin with Marina. And my question today is, you all have demanded bolder action to tackle the climate crisis, and young people far and wide are also tapping into their skills to speak up for climate action. Would like to know what's your advice to your fellow young leaders that are passionate about the environment, but they may be unsure of where to start or even how the climate change storytellers and leaders can become, the change makers. How can you make sure that we are shaping this planet for everyone in a way that everyone who is unsure of how to step in and be part of the solution is going to have that courageous leadership to step up? What would you tell such a young person, Marina?
Yes, that's a great question. So I think I would start reading about climate and how it affects your city, your region, your country, and who are the people that are being more affected by it, and who are the responsible. If it's a principal government, who is the person that is not doing their job, that the climate is so bad that these persons are being affected. So, and how it intersects with other struggles for justice. Just try to understand how this problem is acting and affecting a lot of people. But you don't need to be a science or an expertise to understand it. You just need to understand the basics so you can take action. And you can find resources on fridaysforfuture.org or on Fridays for Future Instagram from your country or from your city. So I really encourage you to DM these Instagrams that are from youth movements, that you can ask for resources to learn more, or you can ask to join and to take action in some campaigns. And if you don't have in your country or in your city or in your region, you start by yourself. You start in your city, in your school, neighborhood, with your friends. Just try to understand the problem and don't be stupid and don't be frozen by it. Just use the resources that you find to act.
Thank you so much, Marina, for those powerful words. And would also like to hear from Ilinca. I hope I got that right. Please let us know what you would tell such young people. How can they be climate change storytellers and leaders of change from where they are?
Absolutely. Something that I can't emphasize enough and that has helped me a lot in climate activism is this idea that activism isn't one size fits all, and that's okay. I think that the most common image that will come to mind if you ask a random person to think of a climate activist is somebody who has a megaphone in their hand and is leading a rally in front of a huge crowd. And while I've done that multiple times, and that's an amazing way to take action, it's also not the only way. So I think my biggest advice would be not to be afraid to try different things and find ways to take action that work for you. I started my activism journey by speaking for legislation at my state house. And then after that, I kept on finding out about more and more things that I could try. So I worked on the organizational side of planning climate marches with the US Youth Climate Strike. I've also worked with Girl Up to work on the intersectionality between climate change and gender equality. You can also use writing to take action. You can organize workshops, design infographics. I think ultimately this has made me realize that expressing yourself and through these different avenues leaves so many empowering ways that you can take action. And if you like expressing yourself through writing, you can achieve so much if you just put a pen to paper. And your story can demand action and raise awareness, inspire people to join a movement, and persuade and educate. So don't feel guilty if your activism doesn't look like other people's. When you focus on the things that impact you or your community or the world and the people that you love, your activism, in whatever form you choose, becomes energized and is a really powerful force for change.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the powerful words. And would like to also hear from Ray. What do you think about these young people? How do we begin to help them become the change makers and leaders of change from wherever they are? I don't know if you can hear me, Ray.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Thank you so much. My name is Ray Chris. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Thank you. I was saying that my name is Ray Chris. I'm from Rwanda. I'm 19 years old. And also I'm student at the House of Shalom in Youth Village. So back to the question, that the advice that So the advice that I can give to my fellow young girls is to let them speak what they are saying, speak out their challenging that they are meeting with, not only to look for themselves, also to look in general in the community. The leader should work with the pen and the paper to write the challenge that they are, meeting with. So, and to also look, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear
I was
you.
saying that to see what they are with, what is going on. Maybe me, I'm facing this, and also my fellow girls, they are facing this. So, and as long as you put them together and write them, you will be able to identify and also to speak, and also to let the government know this challenge so that they can help you. And the other reader above you, maybe they have power more than you, so that they can help you to speak out and to tell a story in this. And as Erika said, also, if you are good in writing, you should write this and let them go in newspapers. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ray. And allow me to come back to you, Marina. Climate change, as we have heard, is not going to affect all people equally. And certain identities, age groups, and genders are going to be particularly vulnerable to its effects. And it's already happening right now. Girls and women, on the other hand, are already often bearing the brunt of environmental, economic, and social shocks. And you are passionate about climate action and you have told us your story. So, what are some sustainable routines that you have adopted and you recommend for others looking to make a change as well?
Okay, thank you for the question. So here's the thing. We can try as much as possible to reduce our own impact, but we will only have a safe present and a safe future if we address system changes and like group changes. And if we are going to take real actions, we need to take it globally. So I think I would give some tips that are I do myself at my home, but they're not enough, you need to organize yourself. So if you do this organizedly, that would be great. But if you do it just by yourself, it's not so okay. So I have become vegetarian and almost vegan. And of course, we need to respect traditional people and indigenous communities. And we don't want to say that everyone needs to become vegetarian. But if you can reduce your carbon footprint by don't eating meat by one day of the week or just 2 days, that would be great. If you can, don't buy on fast fashion stores and try to incentivize small producers in your city or buy second-hand clothes. And you can always try to buy organic food by small producers near your region. That's easy to find, at least here in Brazil. They are not really shared because they are not part of the agribusiness and big markets, but you can find them on the streets, and you can find some farmers that use organic agriculture that are nice for the people and are nice for the planet. So I would give these 3 tips, but always vote consciously and always organize yourself so your action can be amplified by more people and we can have a better global movement and global actions together.
Great. I think you've balanced out a really important point of making sure that it's not just individual responsibility, but it's also about system change. Ilinca, what are your thoughts on this?
Phrase that I always find really inspiring, which is that small drops can make an ocean. And that's really what climate activism is all about. People coming together to drive the change that we need. And I think that in my own life, I have taken several steps to try to diminish my waste in particular. But a lot of the sustainable practices that you will see being recommended aren't accessible to all people. And that's really important to keep in mind when you are engaging in climate activism. The fact that this whole idea of sustainability is really depending on a lot of factors that you might not be able to control. So, for instance, where I live, public transportation isn't accessible or even available at all. And there are also no sidewalks or no ways for you to consider walking or using any mode of transportation other than a car. So that's a huge systemic barrier to my community taking action for the climate by limiting our carbon emissions from transportation. And the same sort of barriers are visible in many areas. I've spent time advocating against the usage of plastic straws, but oftentimes people with disabilities need plastic straws. And I've been mindful of that so that the legislation that I've worked on has enabled plastic straws to be available only upon request so that people who need plastic straws can use them. The same thing could go for buying sustainable fashion. It's very helpful for the environment, but it's also expensive, so some people might not be able to afford it. I think that if we want our environmentalism to be intersectional and accessible, we need to understand the fact that no one can truly do it all due to factors that we might not be able to change, like where we live or our socioeconomic status, but that's fine. I encourage anyone who wants to make a change to just look at these options and adopt the ones that work for you. And also, like Marina said, I'd like to mention that the idea of sustainability is also reinforced by a lot of corporations, and they profit off of the idea that saving the planet is up to individual people. But if we look at the data, we can see that 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global carbon emissions. So the real pressure needs to be on corporations and on governments, not necessarily on individuals. Something that's really guided me through activism as well is the idea that activism is something that is the rent we pay for living on this planet and is something that we can also engage in to push for sustainability and to push for climate justice so that our impact exceeds just our household, but also can translate into local and national and global action.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for those remarks. Ray, do you have something to add on the same note? Can you hear me, Ray? So I think she's dropped off, so we will just continue. And I think really one thing that we are picking here is also the aspect that each one of us can make a difference, but collectively we are a force, and also the aspect that each little thing that we do to the planet today continues to either positively or negatively impact the planet. And so we cannot talk about individual responsibility without system change and vice versa. And I would like to also hear from you. Intersectional environmentalism is an inclusive form of environmentalism advocating for the protection of all people and the planet. And what has inspired you to be an intersectional environmentalist, passionate about environmental justice? And how do you practice intersectional environmentalism, or what do you tell us shifted your interest as an environmentalist into working to be able to bridge that gap between social injustice and environmental discrimination? And we can hear from you, Marina.
Yes, of course. Thank you for this question. That is so important. And I need to be honest with you all. When I first joined the climate movement, I didn't think it was about, I didn't understood the intersection that it has. I just think it was about trees and oceans. And for me, it was already an absurd. It was already something that I had to fight back. But when I started organizing myself with people from all around the world, from such different realities, I understood that some people were being more affected. And I understood that I couldn't do anything but to fight back. When you're talking about people's life, you can't be frozen, you can't be stopped by it. So I understood that I was a girl living on a MAPA country. MAPA means most affected people in areas. It's a sigla that we are using to substitute Global South. And I would be most affected as well. So if you are a girl, a human, BIPOC, indigenous, you might know how other crises affect us. And the climate crisis will affect us as much as well. So if you're a boy, a man, and living in a privileged country, you are absolutely invited to fight with us too, because we are demanding to change everything. We are demanding system change, and we are demanding a change that will save people's life. And that means we need everyone with us. So I just wanted to say that it's okay if you can't see the intersectional right now, but when you start organizing yourself, you understand it, and you understand that we are talking about a crisis that will define the humanity from the whole lives. So yeah, that's it. So we need everyone to fight with us, and we need everyone to address it more than just trees and oceans crisis.
Absolutely, and I totally agree with you. Ray, please share with us your thoughts. I don't know if
I don't know if Ray is here, but I could go next.
All right. Okay, go on.
I completely agree with Marina, and I also think that this is just such an important question. When I started, I also had a similar perspective on climate action, and that really has evolved as I've learned more about intersectionality. My interest first shifted to bridging the gap between social injustice and environmental discrimination because I kept on seeing the conversation around climate change, just like Marina, really focusing on the abstract concept of climate science rather than its impacts on people. And it may be true that we can't see carbon emissions, but their impacts are very tangible and are very visible. And oftentimes, all you need to do is look out your window in order to see them. And I saw that the fear and the urgency that I felt, because as a young person, I know that the climate crisis is something that will shape my very future. It wasn't being taken seriously in many cases by officials, by older people, by previous generations. And it truly made me realize that if we treat climate action and climate change as something that only involves composting and solar power, then we're missing out on the fact that people right now are being gravely affected, and we're also missing out on the chance to amplify their voices and learn from them and help their communities. So I think that the voices and the experiences of the people who are most affected should be at the center of policymaking and discussions so we can strive for solutions that really take into account this human impact. And then I think in terms of practicing intersectional environmentalism, I would really challenge you to just sit down with a pen and a paper and make a list of all of the issues that are going on in your community or in the world that you can think of, whether they're related to climate or not. And then try to connect them to climate, because chances are each of them will somehow be intertwined with environmental impacts. For instance, gender equality, as we've talked about today, girls and women are the most affected, and they're also the ones who are leading the movement to change our impact on the planet. And I think that this is helpful not only for you to learn more about the different impacts and try to become more intersectional, but it's also really good for having conversations. And I've used this with politicians in the past too. They tend to treat climate as being this very abstract issue, but if they happen to be especially focused on the economy, knowing the intersection between the economy and the climate crisis is really important to start that conversation with climate deniers or people who may not agree with you that climate change is an issue, and show them how it will impact them, how it'll impact the issues that they do care about. So I think intersectionality is not only essential to really address the climate crisis, but it can also help start those conversations that will shift public opinion and political opinion.
Great. And I think that also shines light on the fact that it is about what needs to be changing right now in order to situate that the most vulnerable people are having climate justice. And this brings us to our next question, that the November 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference of Parties, that the COP26, is going to bring together nearly 30,000 stakeholders from across the world to accelerate action towards the goals of the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC. And as young people who are most vulnerable to the long-term impacts of climate change, would like you to tell us and the audience, what's your call to action regarding environmental justice to global leaders at COP26 this November? And we
Yes.
could go with you, Marina, first.
Okay, so my call to action is just really simple. Just listen to the science and acknowledge that what they are saying is not exaggerated at all. What they are saying is the reality that is happening for frontline defenders and MAPA countries. And when you talk, you world leaders, you talk about this emergence with distant targets, that mean you haven't understood the whole problem. And I can say an example, the Leaders Climate Summit that is happening exactly right now. Mostly of them I checked before I entered this panel. They are promising net zero targets until 2016. And that's not enough. That's not nearly to be enough. People are being affected right now when we talk that we need climate justice, when we say that we have frontline defenders that are being affected. We don't mean that they will be affected 30 years from now. We mean that they're being affected right now. So this summit that has made me so angry and sad at the same time, because that means they haven't understand anything and they are still not acting upon the science. And I have hope on COP26, but I just wish they were more ambitious because this is not ambitious at all.
I totally agree with you. And what are your thoughts, Ilinca, on the same?
I completely agree. And I think that they not only need to be more ambitious, but they need to make sure that they are taking into account the different aspects of the climate crisis. So currently, COP26 has 5 themes for their upcoming summit, and those are clean energy, clean transport, nature based solutions, adaptation, and finance. And I definitely think that these are all essential aspects of climate action. But there are also a lot of absences on this list, and I think that that'll prevent them from really taking action from an environmental justice perspective, because this list doesn't include the impact of climate change on people and also the effects that empowering people could have on solving the climate crisis. And especially when it comes to gender equality, climate change is preventing so many girls from going to school. But even though girls are disproportionately impacted, they're also the solution. So if every girl were able to exercise her right to an education and have access to reproductive health care, it could reduce total emissions from fossil fuels by around 40%, according to the Malala Fund. And that would make it 4 times as effective as solar power when it comes to solving the climate crisis. So to all the world leaders and stakeholders at COP26, I'm urging you to center intersectionality and to ensure that the human aspects of the climate crisis are addressed, because we have science-based solutions, but we also have solutions that are grounded in greater equity and in sustainable development. And we can't afford to treat the climate crisis and social justice as 2 entirely separate issues, because then we're missing out on the chance to progress our society and also to solve the climate crisis. And this is especially relevant when it comes to gender equality, because helping empower and uplift girls can change the world and protect it at the same time.
Great, thank you so much. And I think also the other really important thing is, despite the fact that countries are sending out commitments to decarbonize by 2030, 2050, all of these commitments are definitely sending some signal, but at the end of the day, what really matters is how these commitments are also being applied in what is happening right now, because we want to see countries also committing and making sure that those commitments are reflecting on the decisions that we are making each and every day, because the crisis is no longer a future concern, and delayed action is definitely going to continue causing more loss and damage to the most vulnerable people. And it is something that we should definitely not accept. It has to be urgent action now, because we are in a climate emergency. And this brings me to our last question. Being outspoken climate and gender equality activists, how do you balance this activism with a normal teenage life? And I'd like to first hear from you, Marina.
Yes, I really like this question, and something that Ilinca said in the beginning of our panel was activism is the price we pay for living in this earth. And I think the first thing that we need to address right now is that activists, especially youth activists, weren't supposed to exist. Like, what we are doing is not that we love it, is not that we came to this world to do it. We're doing this because our life and our future and present depend on it. So I think that the first thing we need to understand as well is that this is a grassroots movement, and this movement is built with a lot of people. And when you get deeper involved on movements and organizations, you can try to like create boundaries that go above just working together, that go just like you're not just fellow activists, you are fellow friends, you are sharing a future idea of a perfect future, idea of a safe future. So my type would be for you to just try to build these boundaries and understand that if one week you can't do so much and in another week your friend can't do so much, you can try to cooperate with each other. And it's okay if you need to take a rest. It's okay. We don't want also to be burnout, and that's a common thing between activists, that we start doing a lot of things and then we burn out. And if everyone burns out together, who will be here to address these things? Who will be here to pressure world leaders? So I think you just need to be conscious that you are in the movement that is made of people and people are here to support you. So yeah, just try to balance this and understand that we are all together and we all need each other safe and healthy.
Great. So let's move to you, Ilinca. How do you balance this activism with the normal teenage life?
Marina made really, really good points. And I think the fact that there has been so much inaction by world leaders and by corporations when it comes to climate change has made it difficult to have a normal teenage life, because there is a lot of pressure, at least that I think a lot of young people are feeling, that we need to take action because a lot of the planet's future does depend on it. But at the same time, activism can really become overwhelming if you feel like you're alone in it. And the best part about the climate movement and about the gender equality movement that I found is that it's really rewarding and wonderful when you get to work with a community and you can work to create that change together and also support each other, just like Marina said. And I've met some of my best friends through my work with Girl Up, and it's really like a global sisterhood because all of us are coming together with our shared passions and our different experiences. And that can lead to really strong friendships that can make organizing a lot more easy to fit into your life, because it becomes your source of friends and community. And I think that that's one of the most empowering and inspiring feelings, and that can help when times get tough and you feel like a lot of global progress is really depending on you speaking up. Having that support system and that network can really help. And then I think a practical tip that I would recommend when it comes to balancing it all, and that I'm still working on myself because it is very challenging, is scheduling time to unwind. I know that a lot of climate activists, myself included, really have packed schedules full of things that they need to get to, whether it's school and activism and also other commitments. So just making sure that you block off some time for you, just so that you can take a walk, and especially with climate, like reconnect with nature and the reason that you're doing it all, and spend time with your friends. That can help you avoid that burnout, and also remind yourself that if you don't rest, you can't do your work. So finding that balance is really key.
Absolutely. Really inspiring stories and message from our panelists today. And I'm not sure we have questions from the audience, but allow me to hand it over to Jahmila in case that we don't have any other questions to take it up from here.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was so incredible, y'all. But before I say too much, I'm going to pass it to Ko Barrett, the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Research at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. She was also one of the first women elected to serve as a vice chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Ko is widely recognized as an expert on climate policy, and I am super excited to pass it to her for concluding remarks.
Thanks, Jahmila. Hi, everybody. Wow. First, let me say Happy Earth Day. For me, there's no better way to celebrate and recommit to environmental protection than to be with you guys today. I know our generation can't leave this problem to you to solve, but we will need your leadership to help solve it. And from what I heard today, we are on a great path. Your passion, your ideas, your commitment, it just leaves me very hopeful. I know it's not going to be an easy path, and some of you talked about the challenges with commitments and things, but it is the right path. And, you know, as some of you said, you know, in my country, the US, and among so many world leaders, there is new energy to think of climate change as a motivation to embrace kind of a new economic approach with new jobs and implementation of carbon neutral approaches to energy provision, transportation, ag, housing, manufacturing, and on and on. I love the earth-centered, people-centered approach that you have all talked about today, because it's equally important. We have to keep environmental intersectionality front and center, so we leave no one behind. Elizabeth, Marina, Ilinca, and while we had Ray, oh man, your stories and advice have been really inspirational. I learned so much from you today. And I'll just say, you know, one thing climate scientists like myself know very well is that we can do our job to get the most up-to-date climate science information into the hands of decision makers and activists. But real action to address climate change requires actors and activists working within your communities to enact the solutions that are needed. You all talked about this today. Ilinca, I loved your statement about the many ways to be an activist. Sometimes you're on stage, but it's also important to work behind the scenes. And I agree wholeheartedly with what you said, you know, because it's really important to channel your passion wherever it is, because your passion tends to be really infectious and really engaging. And so finding your own specific way to be an activist, it does sound, you know, like terrific advice. So thanks for that. Ray reminded us about speaking out about what we are seeing, and that's so important. I mean, we're seeing it actually in the US with the racial injustice, you know, finally getting to see this stuff is making people change. And, you know, accountability sometimes requires us to hold up a mirror to help people see what needs attention. Marina, Ilinca, Ray, thank you all for talking about the range of actions that are needed, from individual to global action. Our diet, our clothes, how much waste we produce, how we move through the world, all are important. But our actions, individual actions also, as you said, need to inspire and inform systemic change. I also believe the conversation we had today, and are frankly having all around the globe, about environmental justice is really important. Marina, I really appreciated your honesty about the learning process you went through to see that intersectionality is important. And Ilinca, your perspective about climate sometimes being abstract is so right on. I have to confess, you know, I've been working in climate science and climate policy for over 20 years. And the IPCC put out a report 2 years ago on the impacts of 1.5 degrees, what it would take us to do to get there, and, you know, when it was likely to happen. And even for me, after working in this field for 20 years, it was a wake-up call to me, because it brought this abstract climate change thing very, very into focus. You know, we are going to hit 1.5 degrees potentially, you know, in the next 10 to 20 years, depending on how we approach action. 10 to 20 years, that's now. And so when you're hit with those kinds of facts, it forces you to take action that even somebody like me who's been working in the field, just hadn't taken as seriously as I needed to. So I just appreciate your wisdom in bringing that to the conversation today. You all talked about the need to think about people and equity and sustainable development. It's so important. As scientists, sometimes we get stuck in the data and the research and forget to talk about the people. I think IPCC does a pretty good job with this. In the early days, we focused very much on the science and what was happening in the physical climate system. And, we have now for many, many years, over 20, had reports on vulnerability and adaptation, and also the actions we need to take to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. And we were able to bring people into the scientific conversation. But, I think sometimes we talk about facts and we forget to talk about feelings. And feelings are where the passion is. We can inspire people's action by sharing our own feelings and our own passion. And you guys have talked all about that. There's just so much more to glean from your conversation. Elizabeth, I loved your statement about collectively we are a force. I think that's really inspiring and motivating. And I also loved activism is the price we pay for living in this earth, but we have to do this with balance and to be able to recharge. So again, just thank you so much for sharing your experience, your wisdom, and your passion. And I just want to say, yay, girl up. This is so inspiring. And I really thank you for having me. Jahmila.
Thank you, Ko. Your point on the importance of intersectionality with climate activism, climate science, and climate policy all working together in tandem was very impactful. And I know I personally learned a lot from all of our panelists today, all of our speakers today. So I just want to thank you all so much. And that's all we have for today, folks. So make sure you check out Girl Up's Storytelling Climate Change Challenge, which is linked on the right-hand side of the event platform. Register for our upcoming STEM Bootcamp on May 8th, focused on pay equity, and submit your climate art to the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Say It With Science campaign for a chance to be featured and win prizes. If you have any questions, feel free to email GirlUp at info@girlup.org or follow us on Instagram @GirlUpCampaign. And once again, happy Earth Day.